everyone! Today I'm finally going to analyze the characters, endings, and mysteries of Silent Hill F. Did Hinako experience a supernatural war between two gods? Or did the entire story just play out inside of her traumatized mind on her wedding day? Today, I want to take a look at these two different but equally valid interpretations of the events depicted in the game, exploring every clue and contradiction, and exploring my own thoughts and interpretation of it all. So let's get into it. I really love the storyline for this game and how much history, lore, and backstory is presented to us, not just with all the characters, but with the town of Ebisugaoka as well. Yes, it doesn't take place in the town of Silent Hill, but Silent Hill F is a very interesting new take on the franchise, one that I think really honors and fits in with many of the previous Silent Hill games' themes. You have a town steeped in religious history and deity worship that seems to be cursed, or at least an area of spiritual power, a well-off cult or clan passed down through family with their own secret cult-like practices and rituals, with a young girl who may have spiritual abilities being caught up in the middle as a potential sacrifice who is also dealing with her own personal issues and trauma that has split herself into two beings, just like Alyssa and Cheryl in Silent Hill 1. You also have the White Claudia and the Agura no Hotai-sama, a red liquid that exorcises demons and evil spirits, just like the Aglaufotis, as well as a sketchy doctor using a PTV-like drug made from the White Claudia called the Kakura Makakura, being used as a medicinal drug with spiritual and hallucinogenic properties, allowing the main character to connect with another world that is connected to her as well. Then you have the main character potentially being manipulated by deities and opposing supernatural forces that can manifest her inner demons and trauma, intending to use or sacrifice her in some way. All of this is very much in line with the previous themes, stories, and characters of the previous Silent Hill games, which I think is actually a really nice way of paying homage to the original series while still keeping it fresh, this time letting us explore Japan as well as its supernatural myths, history, and folklore. Surprisingly enough though, we actually did get quite a few predictions right, which I was really excited and happy to find out. We were right about Hinako's mental state being dissociated into two different personas or personalities of her inner self, as well as Hinako having to sacrifice and kill her friends. We were also right about the Fox Mask's family being from a wealthy clan with a history of fox possession being passed down in the family, as well as the fog monster being Hinako and Hinako having to fight herself as the first final boss of the game. Like some of Ryokishi 7's past works, the story of this game really challenges you to replay the game, digging deep into the notes and documents to piece together what could be going on. And even then, there are different ways you can interpret what's going on. You can't really say whether an interpretation is 100% accurate or not. I mean, you can look at this game as being completely 100% metaphorical, that everything we are seeing is actually not real, but is rather symbolic of Hinako's trauma and struggles with not only her family, but her friends as well. This can be explained that the White Claudia drug given to Hinako by Shu is causing Hinako to hallucinate all of these events in a vicious inner battle between the two sides of Hinako that is going on within her. And then we have the supernatural side of things, where the documents and New Game Plus endings reveal the possibility that supernatural events are occurring, being orchestrated, controlled, and manipulated by multiple deities and supernatural forces in a battle for control of Hinako in order to use or sacrifice her for their own purposes. You can believe it's all metaphorical or supernatural, or a mix of both, and honestly, all these interpretations are equally just as valid. Personally, I like both interpretations, and I can see both sides. However, I do believe it's a bit of both, which I'll explain, but I also want to explore both these explanations first. Throughout the game, we play as Hinako Shimizu, a young teenage girl living during the difficult time period of the 1960s in Japan. During that time in Japan, women were not treated as well as they are today. They were often seen as property, expected to marry young, their marriages usually having been either arranged or seen as a form of transaction between two families rather than genuine affection and love. It was seen as a woman giving up her own free will and identity, carrying on tradition to serve and honor the demands and be obedient of her husband and his wishes, basically taking away her own autonomy and just being an obedient housewife whose only job was to be a slave for her husband, looking after the husband, cooking, cleaning, bearing children, and taking care of them, essentially being erased and absorbed into the husband's family. Hinako has grown up seeing the abusive and demanding nature of her father, as well as the grown-up men's and husbands around the village. She sees her timid mother, Kimie, suffering through the abuse, picking up for Hinako's father even when he's in the wrong, and she even berates Hinako for sticking up for her. Hinako also sees her sister, Junko, and the other women in the village trapped, forced to accept this way of life, scared of being shunned, shamed, and cast out by society, because back then it was considered unfathomable for a woman to break tradition, to be alone, on her own without a husband, and making her own decisions. Hinako, or at least the teenager we first meet, is both stubborn and free-spirited. She defies tradition. She is more of a tomboy, preferring to reject gender stereotypes and roles, such as playing with dolls or acting more girly. She plays with the boys, she doesn't like things being decided for her, and she wants to make decisions for herself, even if she regrets them later on. I honestly related to Hinako a lot in this game because honestly, I grew up the exact same way. I was more of a tomboy, not wanting to wear dresses or play with dolls. Instead, I wanted to play video games, Hot Wheels, or with action figures, feeling more comfortable fighting and playing the hero with my plastic sword or wooden sticks in my imaginary fantasy adventures. Hinako thinks of her mother as nothing more than a pathetic, timid woman, enabling her husband's behavior and staying in an abusive marriage, whose sole job is to bear children, raise them, and live a life of servitude to her husband. Hinako sees most men, except for Shu, as perverted, loud, demanding, controlling, possessive, drunken, angry, abusive, greedy, and selfish monsters. Because of this, Hinako loathes the idea of this happening to her, of her becoming just like her mother, being a broodmare stuck in an unhappy and abusive marriage. During the opening hours of the game, we experience and play as Hinako going through her village, desperate to talk to her friends and get away from her parents, who seem to be pressuring her about some decision she has to make. Suddenly, her and her friends are engulfed in a mysterious fog and chased by a huge unseen fog monster, which brings an infestation of beautiful but grotesque flowers, symbolizing both death and rebirth, along with a horde of scary monsters. This is because Hinako's time is running out. Her wedding is tomorrow, and to her it means death and losing her own identity as Hinako Shimizu. She meets up with her friends Sakako, Shu, and Rinko, and is given medicine by Shu to help with her tension headaches. After her friend Sakako dies by Inari's fog, Hinako gets separated from them and eventually finds Shu, going through the rice fields to get to Rinko's house. Once they get there, though, they find out that the bridge connecting to the outside world is destroyed, leaving them to make their way through the school. As we progress through the game, though, Hinako begins fainting, waking up in a strange, otherworldly dark shrine temple, meeting a mysterious fox-masked man who seems to captivate her and guides her along deeper into the shrine, eventually convincing her to go through with his cult-like rituals and ceremonies in preparation for something. These rituals involve helping Hinako rid herself of her past, killing off her friends, family, and even mutilating herself to sever the relationship and ties to the past, in an effort to kill her inner self and become an obedient slave to Foxmask. Later on, after waking up in the school to find Shu and Rinko missing, Hinako makes her way to Shu's house, and then finally back to her own house, where she sees her friends dead and has to confront her parents, eventually going on a rampage against the fog monster, who appears to wear a shuramuku, a traditional wedding kimono that women typically wear on their wedding days. We find out that the shuramuku fog monster is actually the Dark Shrine Otherworld version of Hinako, who has completed the rituals, transforming into the perfect fox bride monster. When the fog monster kills Hinako at Junko's request, the rebellious teenage Hinako fades away from the foggy world, eventually ending back up in the Dark Shrine for the very first time, where she finally faces off against the Shiramuko, her fox bride form, once and for all. From the first ending, we find out that the entire game actually takes place on Hinako's wedding day, and that the real version of Hinako is really in her 20s. The pills Shu is giving her this time are not the regular peony and kudzu root pills that he normally gives her for her usual tension headache. The pills he gives her this time are actually infused with white Claudia, the hakokuso as it's called by the villagers. Like the PTV drug made by the Order in Silent Hill, Shu and the physicians of the village are able to make a drug from the white Claudia. This drug is called the Kakura Makakura, and it is essentially a precursor to the PTV drug. This time, Shu gives her the Kakura Makakura drug made from the white Claudia, but Shu also has his own reasons for giving them to her. He hears rumors of tales that the drug can actually help you communicate with your inner self in the form of lucid dreams. So, Shu decides to test them on himself and is actually able to talk to his inner self during his dreams for several nights. Shu himself has his own confliction about Hinako's marriage. He likes her, probably as more than a friend, and doesn't want her to marry, but wants to continue to be there for her and doesn't want to ruin the friendship and relationship they have as childhood friends and partners. He is essentially drugging her and has his own selfish reasons, but he genuinely believes that the pills will help Hinako to speak to her inner self so she can truly figure out for herself whether she wants to marry Kotoyuki or not. He really does believe that Hinako will eventually realize she doesn't want to go through with the marriage. The Silent Hill F novel delves into this a little bit more, telling us that once Shu took the drug he made containing the white Claudia, that he was contacted in his dreams by Hinako's doll, who told him that Hinako was in trouble and asks him to lend his strength to it in order to help save her, even though Hinako had abandoned the doll. The novel also confirms that the reason Hinako's doll is still around is because Hinako actually gave the doll to Shu. She was about to throw it out, so he asked for it so they could use it for the training sessions in their Space Wars activities. We don't realize it until later when the two Hinakos meet in the Shimizu residence, but these drugs, along with Hinako's fragile mental state, has actually caused Hinako's mind to fracture, splitting herself into two personas or personalities. This eventually leads to a psychotic break on her wedding day, leading her to killing off her friends, family, and fleeing the shrine with the police in pursuit in the first ending, as both versions of herself endlessly continue to fight each other inside the Dark Shrine Otherworld. Essentially, this means that throughout the game, we are playing as two separate versions of Hinako. One that has regressed back to her teenage self during her teenage years with her partner, Shu, and her friends Sakago and Rinko. This is her teenage self, where she was more rebellious, stubborn, and more set on living her life her own way, but also had her friends and was happier during this time, even when constantly dealing with the abuse of her father and her mother who constantly picked up for him. Hinako was more independent during that time, having hope for her future, rebelling against tradition and her family, determined not to become like her parents, and wanting to live her future life by her own rules and make her own decisions. The other Hinako in the Dark Shrine is Hinako's older self, in her 20s, who has decided to embrace tradition and fulfill her duty as a woman in society. It's also the version of Hinako that has started receiving letters from Kotoyuki, the fox-masked man, and corresponding to him. This Hinako has started to develop feelings for Kotoyuki because of the kindness he shows her. It's during this time, though, that she also realizes that Kotoyuki is actually a childhood friend that she used to play with and saved from a fox when he was bitten by one on the playground when they were children. Kotoyuki is part of the Tsuneki family, a rich and powerful family that has always seemed to have good fortune and luck surrounding them, leading them to both prosper and grow, especially during times of misfortune. Kotoyuki's mother, Sachi, was originally a maid working for the rich Tsuneki family, who had a secret relationship going on with Kotoyuki's father, Hidetoshi, the next heir in line to take over the Tsuneki family. However, when she became pregnant and his marriage was arranged to someone else, he kicked Sachi out of the house, where she came to Ebisugaoka to raise her new baby. This is where Kotoyuki met and befriended Hinako for a time, before he had to move away again, eventually being called by his grandfather grandfather to take over as the new heir of the Tsuneki family to continue their lineage after his father Hidetoshi and his wife had passed away from a mysterious illness. After communicating with him again, this older version of Hinako started becoming infatuated with him, starting to wonder if maybe it's better to let herself get married, relying on and letting someone else make all the decisions for her instead. We find out later that this may actually be because Kotoyuki unknowingly placed a hex or a romantic spell on her through his letters, which is why they smelled of sandalwood. To Hinako and her family though, Kotoyuki seems kind and caring, and from a rich family, offering her a life of comfort and high status, where she doesn't have to worry about money ever again. This version of Hinako is older, in her 20s, and so has probably become broken down and pressured over the years by her parents and her sister Junko into accepting the idea of marriage and that she must settle down, killing off any remaining childhood memories and relationships, and become a dutiful wife, forced to obey him and lose her own identity and will. In her journal, Hinako actually compares it to having an alien trying to take over and steal her body from the old her, just like the old Space Wars game she used to play with Shu as a child. Later on in her journal, Hinako then comments feeling like her parents are fattening her up like a pig for slaughter. To her, marriage equals death, and she begins to think of her wedding day as the day of her funeral and execution, because if she marries Kotoyuki, she will be giving up her identity, her free will, and spirit, essentially killing herself, and to her becoming a lifeless corpse, a puppet on a string, or a meat sack, rotting away, a shell of her former self that lets her husband decide everything for her and having no will of her own. This is evident in the appearance and manifestation of Junko that we see throughout the game, her older sister, who, according to Hinako, had completely changed when she got married. The Junko we see and talk to throughout the game is actually not the real Junko, but rather a manipulating, verbally abusive, twisted, corpse-like version of her with stitched together body parts, rotten flesh, and wearing a creepy owl mask. I think this version was probably influenced by the pregnant Junko that Hinako saw in the hospital when she was suffering from horrible morning sickness, a version that looked like an aged, rotting corpse to Hinako. When she saw her sister like this, it was as if she disappeared and couldn't recognize her anymore, which is why we can never see Junko's real face in the game, and why it's always covered by a mask. To Hinako, her sister had abandoned her to conform to tradition, fueling resentment within Hinako, and leading Hinako to imagine her sister as a cold, unfeeling, corpse-like creature, unrecognizable, that is trying to manipulate her into marrying Kotoyuki. Even the women standing with their husbands as Hinako and Kotoyuki walk down the aisle are the same undead, rotting corpses, stitched together like rotten corpses or pieces of meat, because this is what Hinako thinks will become of her once she marries as well. Throughout the game, we are shown everything through Hinako's perception that has been warped by the White Claudia drugs in her system, regardless of whether she is still currently taking the pills or not. When we are going through the village of Ebisugaoka, it is likely that we are going through a dreamlike reconstruction of the village in Hinako's mind, making most of the game both a spiritual journey and a drug-induced hallucination. The Foggy world, though, could also be a dream that the Tsukumogami has trapped her in order to manipulate her into staying with her friends and family, not going through with the marriage, and eventually killing off her shrine self. It's unknown how long Shu has been giving her with the White Claudia pills, or if he just started giving them to her at the beginning of the game. So we don't know if the drugs have already been in her system or if she's been on them for a while now. Nonetheless, whether she takes the pills throughout the playthrough or not, her mind has already been affected by them and has created these two separate fractured versions of Hinako, which means she had to have been taking them because these two separate versions of herself would not exist otherwise. So I think it's safe to say that these pills might actually have already affected her or have been in her system before, as Shu mentions having taken the pills himself a few days before he started having any effects from them. The Silent Hill F novel, though, does seem to confirm this, because it mentions that Hinako has been taking the pills up until a few hours before the events of the game. Having said that, though, we also find out in New Game Plus that Hinako's mother, Kimie, had some sort of cancer and will likely die from it if she does not get treatment treatment and surgery for it. We don't know what type of cancer it is, but it could very well be brain cancer, and Hinako could have inherited it from her mother as well. There is actually a hint towards this in a document we get that mentions autoscopic hallucination or doppelganger phenomenon, which is a type of visual hallucination caused by brain tumors who could actually see and sometimes talk with a reflection or doppelganger of themselves. If we look at it from a metaphorical standpoint, then Hinako could also have simply inherited her mother's cancer in the form of a brain tumor and could be suffering from this as well, causing her mind to just split in two and seeing hallucinations, not just from the drugs themselves. Even the endings we see with Hinako aren't what the people at the wedding or what Hinako herself sees. We find this out because Shu and Hinako both comment on each other's clothing in one of the endings, with Shu commenting about how Hinako looks in her wedding dress, and Hinako commenting about how weird it is to see Shu in a suit and tie. Yet we don't actually see them in these outfits in these moments. To us, we just see them in their regular school outfits as teenagers. We also find out from the police report that in the regular normal ending, Hinako killed her friends and family and has left the shrine in her Shiramoku wedding outfit. In New Game Plus, we find various newspaper articles, notes, documents, and more that actually give us a lot more info on the town of Ebisugaoka, its numerous faiths, and religious beliefs that have changed throughout the years. We know that the town is plagued by poisonous gas leaks and geysers from underground springs. We have the legend and faith of the water dragon, which is actually based on the real-life folklore and legends of the Yamada no Orochi, a gigantic 8-headed serpent dragon that used to demand a sacrifice, feeding off of a young maiden each year, that was eventually slain by the storm god Susanoo. In the game, we learn that one of the heads of this water dragon had enough power to escape, flying off and falling deep into the ground beneath the mountains of Higa no Kuni, which would later become Ebisugaoka. During this time, the villagers reported toxic gas leaks and geysers erupting from the underground streams beneath the village, leading many to abandon the area. Years later, defeated warriors from the shamed Taira clan fled to this area, where they formed a sanctuary, leading to the creation of the village of Ebisugaoka. To quell this water dragon's wrath and appease him, the villagers turned to worshipping the dragon, giving offerings and possibly even sacrifices to try to stop the gas leaks. After a while, though, this changed when a 10-foot monk sprouting multiple masks came to the village and told the villagers to worship the 1,000-year-old sacred divine tree, which would supposedly zap the evil from the water dragon, subduing it and keeping the water dragon at bay. Shortly after that, the Tsukumogami faith got introduced. It's said that the Tsukumogami are created when an object becomes 100 years old and gains a deity or evil spirit to inhabit it. In the game, the Tsukumogami faith was started by the Taira clan, who would use and repurpose their tools for as long as possible until the end of its lifespan, where they were then laid to rest by offering it to a local deity. The villagers worshipped the divine tree, not only to suppress the water dragon, but primarily because it was actually seen as the next oldest object in the village, leading people to leave tools as offerings. The divine tree was supposedly over 1,000 years old, and buried at the base of it is the sacred sword of the deceased leader of the Taira clan, who were defeated by the Minamoto family and swore vengeance against them. This sacred sword held the resentment and animosity of that clan that continued to grow under the tree. Because of this, the villagers supposedly created a sacred barrier using the Jizu statues as anchors. When the divine tree was later struck by lightning and burned down, the villagers turned to worshipping the next oldest thing, which eventually led them to worship the Inari-sama fox statues throughout the village. And so, the Inari faith was born, with legends telling of a fox family clan led by the goddess Inari and her devoted fox messenger, who would keep the water dragon subdued and sealed away deep underground. Later in the game, we learn that the Fox Messenger and his clan would then seek out and spirit away women having divine blood who were seen as possessing special spiritual power in order to marry, and possibly sacrificing these women every 8 years to ensure that Inari-sama's power remained at full strength in order to keep the water dragon and its poisonous geysers from destroying the village. In New Game Plus, we find out that there could be two opposing forces vying for control of Hinako: the Tsukumogami in the form form of Hinako's childhood doll that eventually possesses or uses the form of Shu, and the Fox clan, consisting of Kotoyuki, who was bitten and possessed by a fox as a child, and his grandfather, the Kyuubi, his ancestor and head of the Tsunekis that runs the Fox clan. Each of these supernatural forces are manipulating the two separate versions of Hinako into either going through with the wedding or stopping it. In the foggy world of Ebisugaoka, the rebellious teenage version of Hinako is being guided and manipulated by the Tsukumogami-possessed doll to try to escape her wedding, but the Kyuubi keeps bringing the fox and the fog monster, the Shiramuku, Hinako's other Dark Shrine fox self, in order to stop her. In the Dark Shrine Otherworld, the shrine version of Hinako is guided by Kotoyuki and his clan into going through with the wedding, but keeps being warned by the doll, the Tsukumogami. When this doesn't work though, the Tsukumogami starts bringing in an eerie red foggy mist with a horde of monsters, even going so far as to possess Sakako or taking on her form to fight Hinako's other self in order to stop the wedding and rituals from happening. If we look at this from a purely metaphorical perspective, it becomes clear that the two opposing deities fighting over Hinako actually represents Kotoyuki and Shu, two men fighting for Hinako's affections. Both are possessive over Hinako. They are obsessed and selfish, wanting Hinako to be theirs, claiming to have her best interests at heart. But they are so influenced by patriarchal traditions and men's views back then of how women were treated like property during that time period that they can't help but see Hinako as a prized possession, because that's honestly just how they were raised and brought up by their parents and society, and so they don't know any better. Kotoyuki in particular seems like he's possessed by a fox, but from a metaphorical standpoint, when you think about it, he was raised by his strict mother, who constantly raised him to be seen as superior to everyone else, spoiling him and treating him more like an adult man who would take over his rich family and get everything he wanted. He didn't really get to have a normal childhood. Then he was groomed and brainwashed by his grandfather, as well as his fox cult, into becoming a part of the family and continuing with their traditional beliefs, rituals, spells, and ceremonies. The novel confirms that Kotoyuki doesn't even know that a romantic spell was placed on him and on Hinako through his letters, because he was just following his family rituals and mostly doing what he was taught to do. If we look at the final boss fight of the Kyuubi in the true ending, Kotoyuki even comments after the fight, apologizing for his grandfather's behavior because he had too much to drink and is getting out of control, which really puts into question if we are really fighting the Kyuubi fox messenger or if it's just symbolic of fighting with his grandfather, who is actually the root cause of the traditional outdated patriarchal beliefs and arranged marriage that he is forcing upon them. One could also reasonably argue that we could ignore all the documents, notes, diaries, and letters we find throughout the village and New Game Plus as being all inaccurate fabrications, delusions, or hallucinations of warped perceptions created in Hinako's mind that were all twisted by the history of her village, the local legends and stories she heard growing up, as well as traditional Japanese folklore and Shinto practices throughout Japan. The divine tree could very well represent the old ways, tradition, duty, and sacrifice for the greater good. The sealed water dragon could represent Hinako's suppressed desires and Hinako's true self that wishes to be free, released from the shackles of her society and how the women were expected to live back then. The war between the two gods could be symbolizing not just the inner conflict between Hinako's two selves, but also both the real war for her affections by Kotoyuki and Shu, both of whom she feels torn between. If we look at the Foggy world and the Otherworld, they could also represent Hinako's inner struggles. The Fog world could represent the side of Hinako that is resisting her fate, who has regressed to a time where she had control of her life, that wants to keep on living and being who she was in her teenage years, not wanting to move on and let go of her carefree life with her friends. From the first ending, we know that the game takes place on Hinako's wedding day and is being held at Tanayoshi's shrine. The Dark Shrine world in this shrine is where Hinako is in real life, preparing for her wedding, but is also hyper-stylized and warped through Hinako's trauma. This would represent the more grown, mature side of Hinako, who has accepted her fate after being pressured, groomed, and brainwashed by her family and Kotoyuki, and is determined to erase all trace of her former life and old self, going through rituals that for her symbolize killing off her friends and mutilating herself, sacrificing parts of herself in order to be the perfect obedient wife. We could look at it this way, however, I honestly believe that like all the other Silent Hill games, we are seeing a mix of both supernatural, metaphorical, and psychological manifestations, being not only influenced by Hinako herself, but also being manipulated by supernatural deities and forces that have been plaguing Ebisugaoka for a while now. I believe this because there is actually reasonable evidence to support some kind of supernatural happenings going on within the village that has no other logical explanation. We have the grotesque curse affecting the unbelieving and disrespectful villagers that eventually leads to their bodies being infected with insects, rats, frogs, and other nasty things, as well as Sakako herself hearing voices and being contacted by both deities to help them. This eventually leads Sakako to choosing to side with the Tsukumogami in order to preserve her beloved Senisuge shrine. So this version of her in the Foggy world is immediately killed off by Inari-sama and the Shiramuku first. In the Dark Shrine Otherworld, Sakako is either possessed by the Tsukumogami or her form is being used by the Tsukumogami in an attempt to stop Hinako from marrying Kotoyuki. There are also numerous letters, notes, diaries, documents, and newspaper articles that are not from Hinako's perspective, that both predate Hinako's birth, describing clan history with detail and confirming things that Hinako herself has no reasonable knowledge of, that tells us more about the bigger picture of the events going on here, shedding more light on Sakako and Rinko's current thoughts and feelings, as well as giving us more knowledge of the Tsuneki family and the disappearance of the other chosen girls before Hinako in the Dark Shrine Otherworld. That means that these documents simply cannot be mental projections, made-up fabrications, or delusions. Due to these documents, I believe that, like the town of Silent Hill itself, the village of Ebisugaoka is a hotspot of worship and spiritual energy that has led to supernatural forces gathering here and being at war with each other. This has created a plethora of conflicting faiths, deities, and supernatural beings at the heart of Ebisugaoka, each with their own goals and each one guiding Hinako's two opposing selves in a dream world of sorts, a spiritual land of the gods that they can corrupt, invade, and manipulate. The water dragon wants to be free, to destroy the village and others, continuing to sacrifice and kill women to satisfy its voracious hunger. The Kyuubi and the fox-possessed family, the Tsunekis, want to continue their lineage and tradition of marrying and sacrificing women, having their clan continue to grow in power and prosper with good fortune, so they can keep the dragon sealed and gain the worship and praise of the villagers. Then there's the Tsukumogami, who is probably one of the more mysterious beings in the game. We know it has a hateful grudge against the Inari faith for stealing its worshippers, and that it wants to stop the Inari Fox clan from marrying, possibly overthrowing them and wanting the villagers to worship the divine tree again instead of Inari. We know it's attached itself to the young version of Hinako Shimizu in the Foggy world, possessing and using the form of Hinako's childhood doll in order to try and manipulate and control her into turning on Kotoyuki and stopping the wedding. And we see two final forms of it. One, when it manipulates and possesses Shu in the good ending, and when it reveals its stronger true form in the true ending. We also find out that the Tsuneki's targets seem to be special women who possess non-ABO blood types, who are said to be blood that was blessed by the stars, containing the spiritual ability or power to deepen the bond between mortals and gods. The last girl to disappear was Mayumi, who supposedly had this special blood and power, and now Hinako, who also has this special blood and spiritual power to connect with the gods. It could be that Hinako, like Alyssa, has some kind of special spiritual powers or abilities hidden deep inside that she is unaware of, that makes her a rare and valuable possession and sacrifice, like Alyssa. But it could also be because of the spiritual properties of the White Claudia she has taken as well, which could have awakened her spiritual powers and dormant abilities, allowing her to visit the land of the gods and leaving her susceptible to both them and other evil spirits. This would also explain why the Tsukumogami was able to create an abandoned dreamlike foggy version of Ebisugaoka in Hinako's mind, attaching itself to the teenage version of Hinako in this world, who had become susceptible to its control, influence, and manipulations. The fox family is the Tsuneki family, but if you look closely, their name is actually an anagram of the word Kitsune. We also learn from records of the local doctor of a real curse which seemed to affect unbelieving villagers and those who badmouth Inari-sama and the Inari faith. This curse involves strange and unexplainable circumstances of people's bodies having been naturally implanted with various insects' eggs that actually hatch inside the body, overtaking it and ravaging it from the inside, leading to malnutrition, starvation, and eventually death. There was also the incident in 1880 where 13 residents of Ebisugaoka were killed by a mysterious divine tree worshipper who appeared about 10 feet tall, covered in tree bark and wearing a no mask. This masked serial killer paraded around the village, telling everyone that they worshipped false gods, that the foxes were leading them astray, and that the water dragon would rise again if they did not worship the divine tree instead. According to multiple eyewitness accounts from the villagers, the killer became surrounded by a thick, mysterious fog that rolled in, bringing with it a pack of foxes with glowing eyes. The foxes then approached the serial killer and he disappeared, leaving no trace after being enveloped by the fog. Judging from these events and the history of the Tsuneki family, it does seem like some powerful supernatural deities are at work here. However, I don't believe it's actually the goddess Inari-sama herself, but rather her fox messenger, who is the Kyuubi fox we fight in the true ending. There's a note that mentions that Inari-sama is often thought of as the goddess of agriculture, but is often confused with her fox messenger, and that their worship became intertwined, leading to the fox messenger becoming worshipped as Inari instead. In Hinako's journal, she mentions that Sakako told her that the fox messenger actually took over Inari-sama's role and position for itself, and claims that the fox messenger and goddess continue to fight each other in a supernatural fight on top of the Inari statues. I believe this fox messenger is acting as their god Inari-sama and is Kotoyuki's ancestor that originally made a deal with the Tsuneki family, and is actually the one who the villagers worship and are cursed by. In fact, the novelization also mentions Hinako being in the shrine during the end and being surrounded by other possessed members of the Fox clan called familiars, which are supernatural entities or spirits often depicted as small animals. In folklore, these familiars would be passed down in the family, its kin possessing humans or even taking on human form. For the Tsuneki family, it honestly seems like this family has long been subject to fox possession, with their members being possessed by various fox familiars or fox spirits from the Kyuubi's family and being passed down through their lineage. Right now, it's unknown if the family is actually a family of foxes, as the name would suggest, originally descended from the noble nine-tailed Kyuubi fox messenger who either possessed someone or took on human form and started this fox family or fox clan, or if the fox messenger just made a deal for him and his family to possess the Tsuneki family in exchange for wealth and power. There's also documents suggesting that the family used to act weird sometimes, crawling on all fours, and that they used to suffer from a mysterious illness, which further points to them being possessed or foxes in human form that can regress back to fox behavior. Further documents point to the family having an abundance of good fortune and prospering whenever disaster or misfortune strikes those around them. Regardless, it seems like the family has a history of fox possession being passed down to the men in the family, especially those who are set to take over as the heir to the family. If I had to guess though, I'd say the men in the family either become possessed by a lesser fox from its fox family that is either chosen or summoned by the Kyuubi, the original fox messenger of Inari, to continue the legacy and tradition of their family. I say this because the fox that bit and possesses Kotoyuki in the Fox Whets Its Tail ending is not the nine-tailed Kyuubi we see in the true ending, but is a Shichibi, a seven-tailed fox who is younger than the Kyuubi. This is supported by a letter we find written by Kotoyuki's ancestor that calls him a fledgling, and by the Silent Hill F novel, which actually describes the fox that bit Kotoyuki as a young fox cub that came down from his family in the mountains. The fox possessing Kotoyuki even mentions that to reach this day, it had gone to great lengths, learning of Hinako's world, its customs, etiquette, scholarship, everything. Something that the Kyuubi would have already done a long time ago if it was the one possessing each heir of the Fox clan. Interestingly enough here, I'd also like to point out that in the Fox What's Its Tail ending, when we fight the Shichibi, he starts out as having red eyes and being covered in putrid sores and fleshy pus, representing his distorted and corrupt views and obsessive nature towards Hinako. As you progress through the fight and Hinako talks some sense into him, she actually makes him realize the error in his thinking and ways, leading him to change his behavior. You'll notice that when this happens, his fox form actually begins to become purified, his fur becoming clean and silky, becoming more divine-like, looking more orange and pure like the fox that bit and possessed him, completely erasing the corruption, which is actually a really cool detail. To me, this actually shows that the Shichibi is a reflection of Kotoyuki, his vessel, and that perhaps Kotoyuki and the Shichibi fox possessing him is not evil at all, that he actually does love and really care for Hinako. It's just that he was corrupted and influenced by the Kyuubi's influence and the way he was raised and brought up from a cub when he first possessed Kotoyuki up until now. That's why he starts off all corrupted, and as Hinako gets through to him, he gradually turns more divine and purified, matching his earlier clean orange fox form from when he was a cub. As much as I hate what Kotoyuki forced Hinako to do, I actually think the real bad guys of the game are not Kotoyuki, but are the Kyuubi, the fox messenger of Inari, who has taken over her role as the Inari-sama god in Ebisugaoka, the Tsukumogami deity that ends up influencing and possessing Hinako's doll and shoe, as well as the water dragon. We don't see or hear much about the water dragon other than the story of its head slumbering beneath Ebisugaoka, but we do know it must exist due to the poisonous gas leak and geysers that plague the village, which erupts and completely destroys the village when Hinako rejects the marriage and doesn't go through with it. If she does go through with it though, then the village simply doesn't get destroyed. This is actually a really big detail that the game spells out to us for a reason, which is to show us that there is indeed some kind of entity causing the geysers and that is being sealed by Inari through the power she gains from her fox messenger and his clan from forcing these marriages and sacrifices. In New Game Plus, we find out through documents and on the chalkboard in a secret room of the middle school that Hinako's mother actually has cancer and will likely die from it. In the Shimizu residence in the true ending, Hinako is finally able to talk to her mother one-on-one, learning that her father wasn't in debt because he was spending his money on booze or gambling, but that the money her father had was actually stolen by a very close friend that was like a brother to her father. This betrayal devastated her father, leading him to not be able to control his anger easily anymore. This is even more devastating when you think about it, because now that his wife is sick, Kanta no longer has the money to pay for his wife's medicine, treatment, or surgery. For him, Hinako's marriage, and possibly Junko's as well, is a chance to pay for his wife's surgery and treatment. Hinako also finds out that her mother and other women like her are actually not as weak or as helpless as she originally thought she was, and that women actually prefer to be stronger and more control of their husbands in private, behind the scenes, often scolding her father in private and finding other ways to get back at their husbands to make them apologize. Both her mother and father apologize to Hinako, especially her father, who tells her that it's her choice whether to get married and that he won't force her to get married if she doesn't want to, that he just wants her to be happy. He admits that he's been a crappy father and sincerely apologizes for his actions, especially if they've caused Hinako to distrust men and see them all as abusive monsters like him. Hinako and her other self both come to terms with this, choosing not to forgive her father right now or excusing his actions, but understanding and reconciling with both of her parents instead. In the true ending playthrough, Hinako is able to discover the truth about the influence of the Tsukumogami and the Kyuubi, Kotoyuki's ancestor. Both Fox Hinako and Teenage Hinako realize the truth about being manipulated by forces outside of their control and don't want to fight to the death, but both are overtaken and possessed by the deities, forcing them to try to strangle the other. Kotoyuki sees this and realizes that they are both being controlled by these forces and tries banishing them. This separates Fox Hinako and Teenage Hinako, separately allowing them to face off against each of the deities trying to control them. Fox Hinako also finds out that once once in a blue moon, mankind produces an extraordinary girl blessed with divine power, and that upon her birth, a spell is placed on the Tsuneki clan's successor that stirs within him a desperate desire to go out and seek that girl and eventually make her his wife. The Kyuubi explains that in the past, the clan mostly relied on their cunning, seducing their brides with clever deceits and love spells. This means that Kotoyuki is as much of a victim as Hinako, as he was also acting under a romantic love spell, just like the one he unknowingly placed on Hinako. Fox Hinako then faces off against the nine-tailed Kyuubi, Inari's fox messenger, while teenage Hinako fights off against the Tsukumogami that manifests into a towering, puppet-like, ball-jointed form of the 10-foot-tall monk with multiple masks and arms made from the wood of the divine tree that is fused together with numerous old weapons, tools, and other unused objects, including Hinako's doll at the center. Interestingly enough, when we fight the Tsukumogami, you'll actually notice the background becoming filled with the exact same red mist and black text that occurs at various times in the Dark Shrine Otherworld, such as when you try to get back to the Fox Mask with the key, as well as when you get the stone orb and meet the Oyomoi, and when fighting Sakuko. This means that when we see the red fog overtaking the Dark Shrine with all the monsters, it's actually the work of the Tsukumogami and its influence trying to stop Hinako from making her way to Kotoyuki in the Dark Shrine and going through with the rituals. It's also the same with the notes and diary entries that you find later on in the game that are being manipulated by each opposing deity. The Tsukumogami pretending to be Hinako's friends, telling her that they love her and don't want her to leave them in the notes you find in the rice field puzzle with the scarecrows in New Game Plus, and the Kyuubi fox messenger messing with Sakuko and Rinko's diaries and notes, making it seem like they want to kill Hinako and that they are far worse than they really are in their thoughts and feelings towards Hinako. Once both are defeated, the Dark Shrine world then begins to collapse. Kotoyuki helps Hinako's escape and then realizes the error in his ways, that he failed to think of Hinako and what her true desires were. He wishes to know if his love for Hinako and her love for him is more than just a mere love spell that was cast upon him and Hinako. Teenage Hinako tells him that if his love for her was real, then she hopes that they can meet again someday, after they've thought it all through slowly and carefully, and then they'll make a decision. Hinako then wakes up back in Ebisugaoka. Sometime later, Hinako receives a letter from Kotoyuki telling her how he is traveling, reacquainting himself with his inner child, wanting to discover his own dreams, and live his life to the fullest. Once he does so, he claims he will reevaluate his feelings for Hinako and come back to see her. We then see both versions of Hinako together after the credits, reading his letter, now able to peacefully coexist with each other in their own silent version of Ebisugaoka, and having their own dreams and wishes that they want to live out. This all seems pretty cut and dry once you get all the endings and documents, but there is a few things left unanswered and unexplored that I'd like to theorize about, but sadly this video has already gone on for too long already. For my final theories on some of the unsolved mysteries of Silent Hill F, I'll be creating another video, so please stay tuned for that coming up very soon. Well, those are my thoughts and analysis on the story of Silent Hill F, exploring both interpretations of the game. Growing up, I had a father who has always been a bit verbally and emotionally abusive to me and my sister. So I really related to the troubled relationship Hinako has with her father. As someone who also grew up as a tomboy and who was also bullied in school as well, I also really related to both Hinako and Sakuko's personalities, their outlook, and behavior. It's honestly probably why I hated Rinko so much in this game, because her bullying and superiority complex really reminded me of various classmates I grew up with. So what do you think about the story? Do you think it's a purely metaphorical and mental journey that Hinako is going through? A war between two personalities within herself, with everything being symbolic of her upcoming marriage, her relationships, as well as the history of her village? Or do you believe that supernatural forces like the Tsukumogami and the Kyuubi fox messenger are the ones manipulating Hinako and pulling the strings behind all the events of the game in a vicious battle for Hinako? Please let me know your thoughts below. I'd really love to hear them. If you enjoyed the video and would like to see more game theories and analyses of your favorite games, please like and subscribe and let me know in the comments below. You can also check out my analysis and theory video for Silent Hill: The Short Message here. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.